Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another round of Wellness Wednesdays. Today, we're going to talk about stress and anxiety disorders and the differences between or amongst stress, anxiety, and then anxiety disorders. So, for those of you who are joining for the first time, my name is Christy Bussell. I work for Healthy Campus, which is our health promotion office here at Clemson, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Initiatives. So, we'll go ahead and just get started here. Okay, so these are learning outcomes for today. So hopefully by the end of this training, you all will be able to understand the differences among stress, anxiety, and anxiety disorders, learn healthy coping strategies for stress and stress management, and then lastly, to know campus resources that we have available here. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is stress. Because I think, a lot of the time when we hear stress or we read about stress in an article or we see a news headline or something, it's always at the connotation, negative connotation. So we always say stress is bad. How do we get rid of stress? How do we, de-stress in our lives? But when we're actually going to go through this material, we're going to learn that stress actually in and of itself is not a bad thing. So this man, his name is, I have to look at the pronunciation because I always mess it up. His name is Hans Zelye, and so he was an endocrinologist in the 1950s, and he was one of the first to kind of understand, the mechanism of stress and what it is. And he defined it as the non-specific response of the organism to any pressure or demand. So you'll notice in his definition of stress, sorry, Cricket, my dog is wanting to come up here, so he's here to help out. Um, but you'll see in his definition that he doesn't categorize stress as positive or negative. He just says that it's something that's disrupting the organism. And so when we're talking about the organism in today's talk, we're talking about us as people, right? And it's disrupting what is called homeostasis, or in other words, kind of our MO for us as human beings, our normal resting heart rate, our normal blood pressure, things like that. Stress happens whenever there's something that is disrupting that state of homeostasis. So, for example, if we, were very calm and cool and collected, and then we get a phone call to, or heard about maybe a loved one who got in a car wreck or something like that, that would be stress because it's disrupting our state of homeostasis. We probably would get anxious. Our heart might start to race a little bit more, something like that. But stress is the disruption of that state of homeostasis. So I want you guys to think about for a second, what is it that makes you feel stressed? We're going to talk about the different kinds of stress in a second, but I want you just to think about when you hear the word stress, what is it that makes you feel stressed out? I'll give you a second to think about that. Some common answers might be school, work, relationships, finances, world events, things like that. But they're causing you to feel anxious. They're causing you to feel stressed. And so it's important to note, though, that stress and what we call stressors are those things that are causing the stress for us. They're different for different people, and they're actually stressors aren't actually negative until we perceive them as such. So, an example from my own life that I can provide is that I struggle with patience. I'm not a very patient person, and that comes out very clearly when I'm on the road. So, if I've tailgated you in the past, I apologize right now. But one of my, I guess, weaknesses is that I have a hard time with the slow drivers, and so I get kind of frustrated whenever I'm behind somebody who's driving slowly. And my husband, on the other hand, is a very, very patient person. He balances me out very well. And he doesn't get bothered by that kind of thing. He's just kind of like, well, they're just going their own pace and I'm going my own pace. And he just doesn't get bothered by, people who are not driving the way that he would want them to drive. And so that's just an example of, something that could stress me out doesn't stress him out. And so it's different for everybody. So I think that can kind of help to, if we're in a home with other people and something that might be stressing you out might not be stressing your family member or your roommate out, and just understanding the differences between humans and what might be hard for one person might not be hard for another. So we're going to talk about two different mechanisms of stress, and so they look kind of daunting, but they're really not. So we'll break them down. But there's one called the sympathetic nervous system, and then the hypothalamic pituitary axis response. So this talk is a little bit more science heavy. So I have my notes here just in case I forget anything. But these are the two mechanisms of stress that we'll review. So the first mechanism of stress. So I want you guys to think about for a second, what would you do if you saw this lion chasing after you, right? Say maybe you travel to, maybe somewhere in Africa or, or even here, we have a lot of lions here too. If you saw this lion chasing after you, what would be your immediate response? You probably would feel afraid. You probably would run away, right away. And so those are very natural responses to something that is threatening our lives. So whenever we're in a life or death situation, it's enacting our fight or flight response, which is this first mechanism of stress, the sympathetic nervous system. And so when this happens, our brains tell our adrenal glands, which are those little squishy things above our kidneys. But the adrenal glands release different hormones throughout our body. So when we're in this first mechanism of stress, two hormones are released: epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline, is what we might know it as, and then norepinephrine. And so these hormones is really cool. They then start to affect different changes in our body that would make us stay alive in this situation. And so different things that might happen is our eyes would dilate. And the reason for that is that our bodies are trying to help us see as much as possible of what's going on. Or is there another lion in the area? Do I need to run away from two? What else is going on? So our eyes dilate. Our heartbeat accelerates so that it can pump blood to all of the organs and muscles that need that blood so that we can run away as fast as we can. And then our bladder and our digestive systems actually shut down when we're in this first response for stress, because we don't have time to go to the bathroom. We don't have time to eat anything when we're running away, because we're trying, all our body and our mind is focused on is self-preservation. So we're just trying to get away from that danger as fast as we can. So it's pretty cool how our body, works to keep us alive. And you see how important these functions would be if we were in a life or death situation. So here in South Carolina, we're probably not going to, run into a lion on a regular basis. But another thing that might be life-threatening for us is if we were, stepping out, we were going to cross the street and we didn't realize a bus was coming. And then we look over and we see a bus, heading right towards us. That's kind of what would enact this fight or flight response, because our bodies would just automatically try to get us out of the way so that we don't get hit by the bus. So that's the first mechanism of stress. That's our self-preservation mode. The second mechanism of stress is called the hypothalamic pituitary axis response. And so this response is actually what we encounter when we think about probably the responses that we had a couple slides ago. And when I asked you all, think about something that makes you feel stressed. So work, deadlines, finances, relationships. So all of these demands in our lives, this is the mechanism of stress that's activated when we face those kind of stressors. So this is a more delayed stress response. It could happen hours, days, weeks, months, maybe even years after the stress. After the stress or the stressor affects our lives. And so it's a more prolonged stressor. It's a delayed stress response. So this is not the lion chasing after you. This is the second mechanism of stress. So in this mechanism, our brain tells our adrenal glands, so again, those things on top of our kidneys, it tells those adrenal glands to release cortisol, which you all are probably familiar with that hormone. It's pretty familiar, or people call it the stress hormone. So cortisol actually does some of the similar things that epinephrine and norepinephrine do, like dilate our eyes, speed up our heart rate. They help us, they help expand our lungs so that we can get more oxygen into our bodies. So it does some of the same things norepinephrine and epinephrine do. And it's also cool too, because cortisol can actually increase your attention span. So I don't know how many of you, I guess, just think about how many of you are procrastinators. So I know I am. I'm a procrastinator in certain regards. And so the reason I think why sometimes when we fall into procrastination, I think the reason for it is that because whenever we're facing a deadline, we have a project that was maybe given to us 2 weeks ago and it's due tomorrow and we haven't worked at all on it, right? So when we're feeling that deadline, the pressure of the deadline, we're feeling stressed. And and this is when that second mechanism of stress is enacted and that cortisol is released. And the cortisol helps us focus, and it helps us, bring attention to the current task at hand. It's kind of like a high, which, I just have anecdotally, I have experience of this in college. One of my roommates, my best friend, she did this all the time with projects. I didn't procrastinate a lot in college. I try to get things done as quickly as possible, as soon as they were assigned to me. I was kind of a control freak in that way. But my friend Sarah was not that way. She would kind of wait last minute and, she would work on it a little on a project here and there, but she would really kind of save a lot of the work until, a day or two beforehand. And I think part of her, even though it stressed her out, part of her, I think, was fueled off of that, because she knew, okay, I have to get this done by this time. And it helped her focus. And so I think that part of her kind of thrived in that, last minute type environment. And so that is, that's cool. And I think it's important to note for when we're working or if we're in school. And cortisol is also thought to put an emotion with our stressor. And so again, thinking back to if a bus was heading our way, we were in the road, we don't really have time to think about a lot of emotions. We might feel afraid. That's probably a primary emotion, but we don't really have a lot of time to think about like, why is this bus coming towards me? Why am I out in the street? Why is that driver going so fast? We don't really have time to think about the situation where we're just trying to get out of the way. But in the second stress mechanism of the hypothalamic pituitary axis response, this is when we are putting more of an emotion to a stressor. So an example of this would be that you get in the car, you're driving to an appointment, and then you get stuck in traffic, and you're, really stressed out. You're trying to get to your appointment. You end up being late to your appointment because of the traffic. And so when we're experiencing the second mechanism of stress, and so the cortisol is pumping through our bodies. And this is where we might think, hey, I don't want to do that again. Next time I'm going to try to leave early, or account for the traffic, or, schedule an appointment at a different time, because I didn't like feeling frustrated. I didn't like feeling like I was out of control and that I was late to my appointment, and all these kind of other things that can happen after that. So cortisol is thought to be the hormone responsible for attaching an emotion to the stressor that we're experiencing. Okay, so those are the kind of the primary mechanisms of stress. So, so what are the negative effects of prolonged stress, right? So this is kind of what we talk about whenever you see, different articles about like, oh, this like mechanism, or, stress is bad because it does this, this, and this. And so what are those negative effects? So the first thing to note is that these negative effects of stress come about when we're in that second stress response, the hypothalamic pituitary axis response, when we're in that response for a long period of time. And so our bodies were not made to be in a state of stress, of high stress, for a prolonged period. It's supposed to be for a certain time, either to preserve our lives, or to meet some kind of deadline that we're facing, or to resolve an argument that we're having with a loved one. But we're not supposed to be in that chronic state of stress that we're experiencing. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the United States do feel the long-term ramifications of stress. So what are some of those? So we know that stress, chronic stress, can increase our anxiety rates, our depression rates. We know that they can affect our digestive, they can cause digestive issues. We know that they can cause headaches. We know they can cause heart disease. Long-term chronic stress can cause heart disease. We know that it can disrupt our sleep, our ability to sleep. We know that it can cause weight gain over the long run. And then it also can disrupt our memory and concentration. So again, thinking about the second mechanism of stress, we just talked about, hey, this can actually help me because it can help me focus on the task that I have to do to meet this deadline. And that's true because that's a relative short amount of time that we're experiencing that cortisol pumping through our bodies. But in the long run, if we're constantly having cortisol going through our system, that's actually going to damage our ability to memorize things and to concentrate over the long run. So we don't want to be experiencing stress for a long period of time. Okay. So that's really stress. That's kind of stress in a nutshell. That's when we talk about stress, there's the two different mechanisms of it, the life or death fight or flight, self-preservation mechanism, and then the more prolonged, delayed reaction to stress that we might experience, probably more so what we all experience on a day-to-day basis. So those are kind of the differences of stress, or amongst stress. So anxiety is a little bit different. Anxiety is more of the kind of the emotional side. Stress is a response that happens in our bodies. Anxiety starts in the mind and affects our emotions. But anxiety can be defined as persistent, excessive worries that don't go away even when our stressors are removed. So maybe nothing is going on externally, but we still feel really anxious on the inside. But we know that some symptoms of anxiety are similar to that of stress. I'm not going to go a ton into anxiety and anxiety disorders in this talk because I want to get to how we manage stress. But next month, we're actually having somebody from Counseling and Psychological Services come and talk to us about anxiety and the differences amongst anxiety and anxiety disorders. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about it today. But anxiety is about worry. The kind of the underlying emotion is fear. And then anxiety disorders are different than anxiety that we might experience because anxiety disorders disrupt everyday living. So according to the DSM-5, and the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, it's what psychologists use to diagnose individuals when they come in and they need help, and they, that kind of helps them diagnose, and that's also used for a lot of insurance purposes. My personal feelings on the DSM-5 are mixed, but we can talk about that on a different point in time. But according to the DSM-5, which is the most recent edition of the manual, there's 11 different conditions that are considered the anxiety disorders. And so I listed the conditions here. Some of them you might be familiar with, such as generalized anxiety disorder, otherwise known as GAD, or social anxiety disorder, which is another name for that is social phobia. And then other ones might not be as familiar, such as panic disorder, which is when you would have panic attacks on a regular basis, or selective mutism, which happens, it starts usually when you're a kid, but it can happen at any point in time in your life where you don't speak in certain circumstances because you're feeling anxious. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the different anxiety disorders because I definitely am not. But I just wanted to list them here. And if you have more questions about these, I can actually send you the part of the DSM-5 that talks about these because it's pretty interesting. But having anxiety has to do with the anticipation of a future threat. So something that might happen in the future. Stress, again, has to do with what's going on right now around me. Anxiety is what might happen in the future that could potentially, affect me or my loved ones in a negative capacity. And so again, having an anxiety disorder is different than feeling occasionally anxious, because anxiety disorders are chronic and they affect our everyday living. They inhibit us from doing the things that we want to do. And then, the DSM-5 categorizes anxiety disorders as excessive or persisting beyond developmentally appropriate periods. And they usually last a longer amount of time, about 6 months or longer, depending on the age of the person we're talking about. In kids, it's a little bit less than 6 months. So that's, again, the DSM-5's definition of it. But we know with anxiety disorders, kind of the key thing difference between that and anxiety is that it disrupts everyday living. Okay, gotta pick it up here since I don't want to keep you guys over. Okay, so that's those are kind of some of the, in a nutshell, the differences between stress, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. So now we're going to talk about how we manage stress. So, first of all, I want to say this is, it's not going to be rocket science. And some of these, or maybe all of these ways of managing stress are things that you're familiar with. And so but I encourage you to keep an open mind about, maybe I'll say something that you haven't thought about before, or, I think it's always good to kind of be reminded of how we can take care of our bodies and our minds on a regular basis. And so it might be stressing you out just to see even the list of how many different ways you can manage stress. But don't be overwhelmed by that. Just, take maybe one or two and, commit to practicing them more this week or this month. And some might be more helpful than others for you. So just kind of take what is the most helpful. But I'm going to kind of quickly go through these. And it's definitely not an exhaustive list. There's other ways of managing stress as well. But I thought these were kind of the most pertinent to what we can do on an everyday basis, and then personally what I think is the most helpful. So the first is exercise, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. We know that exercise is really important to keep us, not only physically healthy, but also exercise is proven to be a stress reliever. And we know that through exercise, we release endorphins, which are kind of they're called the feel-good hormones, but they literally make us in a better mood after we exercise. But I think the key thing with exercise is that we have to find something that we enjoy doing. Somebody might love to run and they want to go, try to run a 10K. Other people maybe hate running. For me, I do not like running. It's not good for me. I don't feel good after I do it. So find something that you enjoy doing. And then, for those of you who were here when we talked about resiliency probably last month or 2 months ago, the speaker had talked about how his wife, the way that she really kind of, got interested in running is that she had a goal in mind where she wanted to run a half marathon, and then now she wants to run a marathon. And so she has this goal that she's trying to accomplish, which is also really good. So thinking about exercise, thinking about the short-term benefits of it, because we know it helps us long-term, and we know it helps us reduce our risk of certain chronic diseases. But sometimes it's hard to do exercise when you're just thinking about, 15 years down the road. But then let's think about the short-term benefits like stress relief and, a sense of accomplishment and things like that. And so I'm not going to go too much into exercise because we actually do, this is kind of a plug for a previous Wellness Wednesday session, but we do have a previous session on physical well-being that somebody from Campus Recreation came and did. So I'd encourage you to go check that out if you weren't here. And all of those videos are listed on our website. Okay, so that's exercise. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol is also helpful, which, especially caffeine might be kind of like, oh, I don't want to give that up. I'm really stressed. I need my coffee, that kind of thing. But we know that caffeine can actually agitate anxiety and can make it worse. And then alcohol, even though it's a sedative, which, it calms our bodies down. It literally sedates us. That might feel good in the short term, but we know in the long run, alcohol actually doesn't help us manage our problems in a healthy way. So trying to, if we're struggling with anxiety or struggling with stress, trying to avoid these things so that we can focus on healthier coping strategies. But obviously everything in moderation. So. The third way is that we want to practice mindfulness. And so I thought this little image was cute if you can see it. But essentially mindfulness, I think sometimes people kind of feel intimidated or kind of like, well, that sounds like, hocus pocus, or it sounds like, a religious practice, or it sounds, whatever it might be. But mindfulness is really just the idea of being aware of what's around you. And so if you want a formal definition, it's the basic human ability to be fully present, aware where we are and what we're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So the reason I like this graphic is because this, the man is thinking about all the different things that are going on that he has to do, or things that happened in the past. Whereas I think, his daughter in this little image she's just kind of focusing on what's around her. And the key with mindfulness, the reason why we do it is because it really helps ground us to the present moment. So if we're feeling anxious or feeling stressed, trying to think about, okay, I'm just going to focus on what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, maybe if I'm eating something, focusing on the five senses can really help calm our heart rate down and focus on the present moment. There's a lot of benefits to mindfulness that I don't have time to go into here, but I would encourage you, if you haven't tried it out, I would just encourage you to give it a try. If you go to headspace.com, that has a lot of great resources for mindfulness that you can do for free. It can walk you through different practices, so that's a great resource. And then my office, Healthy Campus, actually has a mindfulness course that is led by my supervisor, and it's called Koru. It's Koru mindfulness. And so if you're interested in that, shoot me an email after this and I can get you information for that. Okay. So we want to talk about some stress busting foods. It doesn't have the, oh, okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, so some stress busting foods that are good for stress relief. So we know that eating a well-balanced diet is really important for us. I think, I don't think I'm saying anything new here. But when we're really stressed, we naturally crave salty, carb-heavy, sugary food. which, you know, that's not a bad thing. That's just kind of our body's reaction to stress, and everything in moderation is fine. Food is not moral. There's no good food, bad food. It's just, again, thinking about moderation. We want to be able to provide our bodies with a variety of different foods that includes ice cream on occasion. But we know that when we're stressed, there's certain foods that can help us manage that stress more than others. And so I'm just going to list out a few here, but we're actually going to have a guest speaker come in a few weeks to talk to us about the differences between, or the ways that we can manage, you know, stress eating, and then also binge eating and alternatives to that, so that, you know, if we're feeling really stressed, how do we recognize that, and then to not fill that, you know, that void with food, but maybe we need to, you know, try a different type of coping strategy that can be more helpful for us in the long run. But I'll just list a couple categories of food that are, you know, can help us with stress. So leafy greens, yogurt, and milk. The reason why these are stress busting foods is because they contain calcium, and calcium can really help with anxiety. We know that fatty fish like salmon or sardines, these kind of protein sources can help with regulating stress hormones and thinking about that cortisol. So fresh fruits and vegetables, I mean, those are good for so many reasons. But there was one study that found if you have between 7 and 8 servings of fruits and veggies, like all together, every day, that can help boost mood in young adults. And then we know that whole grain bread, pasta, and cereal can raise the serotonin levels in some individuals. So having whole grain sources of carbs would be good too. So those are just some stress busting foods. But again, we'll have more information on that in a few weeks from a guest speaker. So a couple other ones, laughter is really important. So you know, laughing is really good for our souls. It's really good for just stress relief. So just find something that makes you laugh. So The Office is my guilty pleasure. I love The Office, and so that's just something that I can, you know, if you're feeling really stressed, just take a break, watch an episode or something of a show that you like, or a YouTube video or something like that to help relieve the stress. Challenging negative thoughts. Again, this is going to be a plug for a former Wellness Wednesday session, but I have I did a whole episode on this. I think it's called The Power of Thought on our website, but challenging our negative thoughts, because we know our minds naturally drift to the negative things going on in our life and not the positive. So I'd encourage you to go back and watch that if you haven't already. Journaling, we know journaling kind of related to the challenging negative thoughts, but putting down how we feel and what we're thinking about on paper can really help create space between us and those thoughts and those stressful thoughts. It can help us process what we're going through. So journaling can be a really beneficial tool to use. Sleeping, I'm probably going to do an entire episode on sleep, because I love sleep in and of itself, and I love studying sleep. But we know that sleep is the foundation to our health, and that's that I don't think it gets enough attention, honestly. But you know, I don't have a lot of time to go into it right now. But sleep has so many benefits, and so for adults, getting at least 7 hours of sleep a night is what is recommended. And then lastly, connecting with our friends. And so, you know, letting somebody know how you're doing and how you're feeling can be a big stress reliever, kind of similar to journaling, where it puts space between you and that stressor by just being able to unload your burden onto your friend, and for them to help you carry that is very impactful. And it doesn't even have to be talking. It could be that you feel like you don't have any time to do anything, and you ask your friend to go to the grocery store and pick up some food for you or something like that. But really just reaching out, and that also gives our friends a sense of purpose and accomplishment that they're helping us as well. So connecting with our friends, we know, has a really big benefit in terms of how we manage stress. And before we wrap up, to get to questions, I did want to just list some resources. So the reason being is that we know that, you know, these are ways that we can manage our stress, and that's great. But there's times in our lives where life just becomes too much, and we can't do it on our own. We can't do it, you know, even with a friend, and we might need to reach out for professional help. And that's, you know, great. And I think that's a really brave thing to do. So we have resources at Clemson that can be helpful. So we have counseling and psychological services for students. We have the Deer Oaks Employee Assistance Program for employees that both of these provide counseling services. And then lastly is TAO, which is Therapy Assistance Online. That's the platform that students use to engage in one-on-one counseling with CAPS counselors, but it also provides these self-paced modules to help with things like depression, anxiety, relationship issues, things like that, that are available for anybody with a Clemson.edu email address. You don't have to be a student to take advantage of TAO. I've done it before, and I think it's pretty helpful. So I would encourage you to check that out. You can just Google it and TAO Clemson, and you'll be able to get the link to it. So that's pretty much all the material I had for you all today. But I did want to just, pause and ask if anyone had any questions before I end the program. Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming to today's session. It is being recorded, so it'll be on our website within the week. I did want to share with you a bit of sad news. Sad in some ways. For the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be unable to do Wellness Wednesdays because I'm actually going to be doing a training to start a resiliency program here at Clemson, which that's a very exciting opportunity. But unfortunately, there's several days of the training, and they're going to happen on Wednesday morning. So for the next 2 weeks, we're not going to have Wellness Wednesdays, and I'll send this all out in an email to the group as well. But I just wanted to let you all know that just ahead of time. But if no one has any questions or anything, oh, sorry, I see some things in the chat box. Let me see that. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I will miss you guys too, and I'm excited to reunite. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye.